Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Twitwell crew. I am here with John, and we are here to talk about the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast with Paul Heyman. Not a ton of really newsworthy information coming out of this show, at least not quite as much as there was with the McMahon version, but it was still a relatively entertaining show, and there was a little bit of a potentially meaningful tease towards the end.
Yeah, very interesting thing about this episode of Steve Austin's podcast on the network. I enjoyed it thoroughly, so this isn't me like bashing it in any way. But I thought in terms of like juicy sound bites and things like that, this is probably the weakest of the set that he's done so far.
Well,
Because I
and the
feel like this
reason
is
behind that is because he's already literally had Paul Heyman on the Steve Austin show 3 or 4 times. I think it was
fine.
2 times, and both of the other times that he's had him on, they've gone to 2 episodes. So 4 episodes, 2 separate occasions. This would be the third occasion that he's talking to Heyman on the podcast, fifth episode. And it just, I mean, at a point, you gotta, they have to run out of stuff to talk about.
Right, and this was to me just two friends, two guys who have known each other for so long in the business,
Yeah.
just kicking back. I mean, if they had a few brewskis, they'd be pushing those back and just having a good time. And I liked it though. I
Well,
dug that
Steve
out.
would. Paul said pretty
Oh yeah, Paul doesn't
doesn't
drink. That's
drink.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. Like I'm just saying, if you were looking for like those grabbing headlines, maybe you got one towards the end. But I've
Vince
always
McMahon buries Cesaro.
Vince McMahon buries yeah, things like that. This probably wasn't the interview for you, unless save for the ending again, which you may be able to extrapolate something. But I enjoyed it for just watching these two guys just talk about the business. I honestly after that I could have heard them talk. I'll probably go back and watch those episodes because I could hear these two talk to each other for hours.
Yeah,
So
yeah. There's some really good stuff about how Heyman broke into the business on the earlier episodes. I've actually been listening to those in anticipation of building up to this show, and I think that there were. We're just gonna attack this from like a bullet point system, sort of. The first thing that they really talked about was the state of selling. Then they talked about promos. And then Paul Heyman told an amazing story involving the Steiner brothers and Sting. And then the whole sort of last 3 minutes or so were very, very kayfabe laden.
yeah, and I think a lot of people are talking about Jim Ross has already thrown his 2 cents in on it those final 3 minutes. But I mean, do you want to get into that right now, or do you kind of want to build up to that? What do you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? We might as well elephant in the room this sucker and talk about the very end. Heyman starts asking Austin if he wants to main event WrestleMania 32 with Brock Lesnar, and Austin turns on that switch and goes from Steve Austin podcast host to Stone Cold Steve Austin ass kicker.
Yeah, he says, I'd beat his ass, Paul, and you know it, and he knows it. And pretty much saying, like, yeah, if we were to do that match, I would whoop his ass. And I think he said, 3 words. I don't know if the words, I couldn't make out what the 3 words were. Did he say Texas Death Match, or what did he say? Because I know he said,
Yes.
like, Texas Death. See, that's what
Yep.
I thought. And see, oh, God, it's like any other time, like if they had done this maybe 5 years ago, a little bit further back when I was like younger and still like whatever, maybe I would have gotten into it more. Like I enjoyed it, but I'm so iffy with Steve because you always hear Jim Ross say all the time, oh, I think it's less than 50-50 that he'll come back. Steve is always, and he even said it here. Steve saying things like all the stars would have to be aligned in the sky. So I never really want to invest too much when Steve invests in that Stone Cold character and he taps into it. But man, just thinking about Brock Lesnar versus Stone Cold in kind of
Well,
a death match where there are no rules.
yeah, and I mean, if you want to
Yeah.
sell 100,000 tickets, that's how you do it.
Oh, they'd have. I guarantee you. It's funny, Ashton. Just to tell a quick aside, I was watching Triple H versus John Cena from WrestleMania 22 today, and Jim Ross at one point says, "Oh, the event sold out in 2 minutes." I think if you had Brock Lesnar and Stone Cold Steve Austin on the marquee, it would sell out even quicker than that, especially with the death match because you got two big names there that have never collided, and they could even tap into that whole story like, oh, Steve, you were supposed to have a match with Brock Lesnar, but that's when you took your ball and went home. Because that's where all the controversy really kind of started. There wasn't even any storyline. They just wanted Brock to just beat Austin on TV. No build up, no anything. And
Yeah.
they could tap into that. I feel like there's so much potential there, but Austin's age and his health and everything, like I thought there was more of a likelihood, honestly, that Austin would face Punk in a Mania than Lesnar at a Mania. But if we got it, man, I'd be into it because
I mean,
when,
say what you
yeah.
will about the Punk thing, Lesnar does make more sense. Maybe not necessarily from one guy's straight edge, the other guy's known for drinking beer on TV, but more just from a dynamic standpoint because you can tell more of like a deep story because that's very like on the surface. Oh, he's straight edge. He drinks beer a lot. These guys must hate each other. That's just kind of silly. But when you look at it on a little bit deeper of a level, it makes a lot more sense that Austin and Lesnar would feud because they're two guys that kind of just barely overlapped with each other. And it's like that fine enough overlap that they never fought. And it's one of those things where you could use the storyline that even Heyman's been spouting out about how Brock basically retired The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin because he tells the story about how Brock Lesnar beat The Rock at SummerSlam and The Rock never came back he didn't come back for a decade. And then about how, Brock Lesnar shows up and Steve Austin walks out and that kind of stuff. And they could really build on that, I think. And they proved here that you don't even need that deep of a story. All you need is Stone Cold Steve Austin and Paul Heyman on the mic, and you've got sold tickets.
Yeah, I feel like all you really need, again, is the more heat. You just need to see Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Brock Lesnar. And I feel like people are going to flock to buy those tickets. I feel like the story would be, again, as you said, very straightforward. Wouldn't have to do a lot of work. Again, I think that those are the best kinds of storylines when the names are so valuable in themselves. You're not even going to have to really do a lot of heavy lifting. And especially, again, when you add the Texas Deathmatch stipulation, I think that does create enough ambiguity because Austin is a brawler, and that would be the interesting thing. Like Brock Lesnar, I feel like up until this point, he's gone against primarily wrestlers. That's the whole thing. Austin it would be a fight with Brock Lesnar, and that Texas Deathmatch I think would create enough ambiguity. Like, wow, could Austin actually beat Brock Lesnar? And I think it would be an amazing match. I don't want to put all of my hopes and stock, if you will, into it happening. I'm just treating this as just two guys having a little bit of fun. I mean, I read, of course, that something serious may be in the works. They wouldn't, waste that kind of time on the network just to, kind of work internet fans or appease them in a certain way. This could be something very legitimate. If it is, WrestleMania 32 is already incredibly memorable for that match alone. I mean, hell, WrestleMania 32, if you have this match on it and The Undertaker's retirement match, it could be the most memorable WrestleMania in recent memory. But only time will tell. But I really like their interaction with each other. And when Heyman really taps into being who he is, because I feel like we only got a sliver of that on the podcast, but when you get him in a ring and a microphone and he could run down Stone Cold while building him up at the same time, because Heyman's just fantastic at that, man, that's money.
Yeah.
That's money.
Yeah, I mean, I highly, highly, highly doubt this is going to happen. Like, you want to talk about under 50-50? I'm thinking more like under 199.
Yeah, I mean, let me put it to you this way. I once read an interview from Stone Cold that said he'd be willing to fight Hogan. I mean, that was for a completely different reason, but he'd be willing to fight Hogan for 100 million. I think to get in a ring with a guy like Brock Lesnar at that age, like all these years later, and your health, it'd have to be a pretty substantive check. I think, and I don't know. I don't know if WWE would find it worth the
Literally, just
investment.
Austin gets 50% of the profits made by WrestleMania 32.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, sorry, Texas. Yeah, I'm taking half. So there you go.
No, I
But
mean half the profit that WWE would normally make.
right. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he'd want a big cut, I think, and Lesnar would want a big cut too. And that's very smart. And I love the stuff that Heyman said about Lesnar, and we may touch on that a little bit. But yeah, would it be a match I'd love to see? Of course, because when you see a matchup like that, you don't put your internet smark on and say, oh, his age, oh, his health, oh, this is the right thing to do, this is the right thing to do. I think the atmosphere just takes you in, man, and you enjoy it. You just
You
enjoy
say
that
that
knowledge.
now, but then, I mean, we got Sting versus Triple H, and we still said that kind of stuff about it. And I think that this is kind of the same sort of situation where it's that dream match that everybody's wanted to see for so long. And as much as you want to convince yourself that, oh man, when that happens, you put all your smartdom aside, you still think about it.
I think obviously you still think about it, but I'm saying when you get there, when you're
When
in
you
the
get, oh
match,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
I
when
mean,
you
but
don't
that's
think
the
about
thing
that
though,
shit.
John. During that match, you were the one that was saying this is ass retarded all the time.
Well, yeah, because
So,
I thought it was ass retarded.
well, that's what I'm saying
I
though, is
didn't
that
really
like
care for that
obviously
match.
we don't necessarily put our smarkiness aside for that kind of stuff.
Well, I think when it kind of jumps the shark, I mean, you have DX come out there and NWO come out there, but I feel like if you have a straightforward fight between these two
NWO
guys,
coming out to help Sting, because that makes sense.
but I feel like if you really did exactly what you said you were gonna do, Texas death match between just Stone Cold Steve Austin and Brock Lesnar, and you just had these guys fight and nothing else really going on. Yeah, I'd be into it because I think, well, how many F5s is it gonna take to beat all? How many F5s can he survive? How many stunners can Brock withstand? And I think it would be so intriguing because this isn't the same Brock Lesnar that came in when Austin, did his walkout. This is a Brock Lesnar that it takes a lot to even get down, to even feel like you're in control. So, what would Austin have to do, within the confines of this kind of match? How deep would he have to dig within himself to even get a slight advantage? Well, I think it could be a fascinating story because Austin's always known as this badass, and I'm not saying Brock Lesnar would humanize him. But man, I mean, it really does look like a mismatch, and I think there's something really compelling about that.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'd be down for it definitely.
absolutely. The one really important thing to kind of emphasize about this, though, was that these guys were working everybody.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because, I mean, you get Austin talking about, I don't know, I'm getting a little hot right now looking at your sorry ass and that kind of stuff. Like, this was an amazing sort of, like, they spent 57 minutes tearing down kayfabe, and then in 3 minutes they built it right back up.
Right. And I love that they pulled it off too, because I think even if you knew that you were kind of getting played, like I don't think you couldn't help but smile about it anyway, because I did have a smile on my face, seeing those two interact that way, and I think that really says something that guys for all that time could be deconstructing the business and telling their road stories and offering their critiques about promos or certain moves, which we'll definitely touch on that. But and then in just those final few moments, they just go and then they put the curtain back, they draw it back, and they do their characters and they tap into it. I think it's awesome.
Yep.
So really great
And I
stuff.
think I think what's great is that these guys were doing exactly what they were talking about earlier. Where's the money? Well, we just found it.
Yeah. Oh, I think there is a shitload of money. Again, I can't stress that enough between Austin and Lesnar. That would just blow the roof off the place. And again, I think if we're doing like a fantasy WrestleMania 32 card, you have Austin Lesnar and Undertaker's retirement match on the same card
Against Sting?
against Sting, probably. Yeah, yeah. Sting would definitely be the most likely candidate. I mean, holy shit, Ashton. Those two matches alone sell WrestleMania. And then we have such a strong undercard, in my opinion,
And it's not even
that
really an undercard anymore. It's just like a secondary main event.
yeah, really, because
Because,
then
like, I mean, you look at the list of names of guys that are on there. You've got Rollins, Reigns, and Ambrose. You've got freaking Cena, Ziggler, Ryback, Bray Wyatt. There's a Triple H. There's a huge list of names that are quote unquote mid carders. It's really just like a secondary main event at this point.
yeah, Daniel Bryan, if he can get healthy in time, I don't
Absolutely.
know about that, but I mean, that's another. And see, that's what's so crazy because if you were to get these two matches on a card like that, you would have
WrestleMania is
all
going
of
to have
that
to go to
talent. Yeah,
5 hours, brother.
it might, but I'm telling you, it could really be one of the biggest productions ever if they get those two matches. Hell, I mean, even if you would just get one or the other between those two, I
It's
still
still
think you'd have a strong
huge.
Mania. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But you get both. Holy shit, dude! Nothing's touching that. Even in terms of like just looking at it purely on paper, yeah, it's a borderline legendary card, if not legendary. Period. But getting back to the focus of all this, yeah, I love how Heyman worked it. Heyman, I'd love to see him, take on more clients. That was kind of touched on too. Austin said, people love your work, but when he focuses on Lesnar and he's invested in what Lesnar's doing, he's untouchable. Like that's when Heyman is truly at his best because I really didn't like the stuff that he did with Cesaro. Really thinking back, I think he's really got to be in it, and he's got to see like an end game. So if he was just to stick with Lesnar, if he keeps performing at the consistency that he has, my God, yeah, him and Steve could do some wonderful things together on the mic, just going back and forth.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad that you said that too, because we've spent the last 15 minutes just about talking about a promo, but on that same note, they did talk about the state of promos in the WWE and what's wrong with them, and Paul Heyman sort of gave a little criticism as far as what people are doing wrong and what he feels like he does right, and I really enjoyed the discussion that they had about WWE's promos.
Oh yeah, I think my two favorite discussions here were the discussions about moves. Specifically, it started with the DDT, and then of course, as you said, the promos. Now I'm a big promo guy. I think when a great promo is being cut, I loved it. Maybe that's because I'm more of like a literary type. I love a good fiction novel. I love good works of writing. So there's something about a really great promo that I find very captivating.
Yeah, you're the literary guy. I'm the guy that listens to all the books on audiobooks.
Yeah, yeah. See, I nothing wrong with that, man. I've been trying to get into that myself, but like you think about CM Punk's pipe bomb promo,
Right.
any Mick Foley promo in ECW, and one of my favorite promos when he was starting his feud with Randy Orton in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I can't find it on YouTube, and it kills me because I love that promo. Mick Foley to me is still one of my favorite promo artists ever. Nobody could cut a promo in my eyes like Mick. So I love, love, love promo guys. So hearing Heyman talk about
Jake the Snake.
Jake the Snake, and again, where is the money? You were kind of saying that, when we were having our whole Lesnar Austin discussion. You
Oh
know,
yeah, because he told that story about how he was main eventing I think it was a WCW show with a promo, and he was doing all this crazy stuff, and he was going from one ring post to the other, and he was talking about every match, and then he got to the back, and he thought that he did this great thing, and everyone was looking at him, and and then next thing you know, he shows up with Dusty Rhodes, and Dusty just says, "Where's the money?"
see, and I think this story, Ash, I don't know about you, and I definitely want to hear more about you because I've always said I think you have a great mind for the business. But for me, this story from Heyman kind of illustrated to me that I think I would prefer kind of a mixed style of promo cutting. And what I mean by that is you let the guys go off the cuff, but I think you give them the bulleted points to sell the product, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Whether it be the feud or the pay per view, you give them those bulleted points so you
Well,
know
there are
that you
some
have
guys that
money.
don't even really need the bullet points. Like you
Right.
look at, I mean, Kevin Owens is one example in the business right now. Obviously, so
Yeah.
is Cena. So those guys working together is brilliant. Punk was a guy that didn't need bullet points. There are a lot of guys right now that don't necessarily need bullet points that know like they're pros. They know how to sell the event without needing a bullet point or a script or anything like that to tell them how.
I always used to love, and I know obviously he does fit in that class, so I guess it's appropriate to talk about him. But I always used to love, right, when Paul Heyman, particularly in his feud with Punk, when he turned on Punk, he would use the fact that he was such a vile scumbag kind of heel to sell the pay per view. Because I think, for example, one match they had was Punk versus Paul Heyman at Night of Champions or something, and he finally would get his hand on Paul Heyman, and Paul Heyman would come into the ring and he would say, "Now I want you to understand me. If you order Night of Champions, you are going to see the end of my life. My children are going to see me get beat up by a man that I once considered my friend." Like, he would just really sell that, yeah, if you get Night of Champions, you are guaranteed to see Punk beat the crap out of me, because he knew that he was such a scumbag, in kayfabe, that, like, hey, if I just turn around on him and say, hey, if you order this, you're definitely guaranteed to see me get my teeth knocked down my throat. I always thought that was so good because, it's not a heel like talking themselves up like, oh, if you tune into this pay per view, I guarantee you, your hero, the person you're putting all your trust, your faith, your love in, is going to be carted off on a stretcher. No, with Heyman, because he's that cowardly, pathetic character, he's like, no, no, you don't understand. If you support this, you're going to see me die. You're going to see him kill me. I thought Heyman
And
was
he was
so
doing
good
it
at
in a
that.
way where it almost seemed like he was trying to like reason with people like, guys, you don't want to buy this because if you do, you're going to witness me get murdered, and you don't want to see that, do you? And then of course the response was, yeah, we do.
I mean, the reverse psychology was just off the charts there with
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, well, and
Um,
that's another thing too is he came right out and explained to people why he does the intro that he does, where he comes out and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman, and I am the advocate for Brock Lesnar," and that kind of thing. Like he talked about how he's engaging the audience, and now to me, I think that works for him. But I don't want now all of a sudden for everyone to start coming out and trying to do that. Like I don't want Cesaro to cut a promo next week where he comes out and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cesaro, and I am the real baddest man on the planet," or anything like that. Like I don't want people to start trying to adopt that style just because that's what Heyman does and he thinks that that's what makes him special. I think you and I can both agree that that is definitely not the only thing, at least, that makes Paul Heyman amazing at promos.
Certainly not. Here's the thing, right? I think every well, I shouldn't say every promo, but I think promos, generally speaking, one of the aims should be to impart something about yourself to the audience so you can establish that relationship. But it doesn't have to be that straightforward. I'll give you an example because I know you love this promo and you made me love this promo. When Dean Ambrose down in FCW, he beat Bronson in that submission match with the Regal stretch, and Regal walked out.
Yep.
And Ambrose just kind of loses it. And we learn about him because, he had his heart broken by Regal, and he talks about all the relationships he lost for a multitude of reasons. So then we learn from Ambrose, he's not coming out and saying, hey, I'm Dean Ambrose and I'm emotionally messed up. No, he shows, not tells.
That's right
I,
there. I was going to say that. If you didn't, I'm glad you brought it up. Show, don't tell.
Exactly, and I think guys like Dean Ambrose, to give him his due, even though I don't really feel like, and this is not a knock against Dean, because I think he even said this on Talk is Jericho, I don't really think he's had that kind of promo yet,
Oh
and I'm
no,
still
not
waiting for
yet.
him to
Not
have
in
it.
WWE yet. Not on the main roster. Like, that's what I love about the Dean Ambrose promo compilation that I made and is up on my channel and actually has over 20,000 views now, is he hasn't topped it yet. Like, that's the crazy thing, is it's all from FCW from 2011, 2012, and yet to this day, it's still his best work since he signed a contract with WWE.
And that's crazy to me, and I wonder if it's just because I don't even think it's a matter of face heel, and I don't think that really has anything to do with it.
Well, and the
I
crazy
just
thing too, going even further than that, is I would argue that his best match in WWE was also in FCW. It was that 30-minute Iron Man match against Rollins. I don't think he's topped that in the ring either yet.
Yeah, and you know what, Ashton, it's so funny because I read quite a few columnists on places like NoDQ and others, and when they talk about Ambrose Rollins, and I do want to get back to promos, but I guess just finishing our discussion around Ambrose, they're still saying, I know these guys could have that match. I know these guys could have that match. I think I said something to you recently, like, I know these guys could have that match that you're
And they've
comparing.
proven
They
that they
just haven't.
can. They just
Right.
haven't proven it on the main roster yet.
I mean, maybe Money in the Bank with the ladder match. I don't know. I thought Hell in a Cell was going to be their time, but we thought Orton Cena was better. It was an unpopular opinion, but
Yeah.
it was ours.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's one of those things with Rollins and Ambrose where if they outdo themselves, we'll know it. We'll have that moment of clarity where it's like, oh my God, this is the match.
And you know what? Like, I going back to promos, I feel like, and here's the thing, I already like the ladder match's chances because Rollins, of all people, I think had that promo this past Monday because now he's saying, like, oh, I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to show everybody I can do it on my own.
Yep.
I'm going to shove it down everybody's. Like, that sells.
And you
Because
know
now,
what, dude? Right there, what you're saying and what you're bringing up, that right there is the reason that we haven't had that match from Rollins and Ambrose on the main roster yet. Because every single match they've had has ended with shenanigans.
right. So now, though, here's the thing: you're going to want to tune into Money in the Bank just to kind of put to rest, like, is Rollins going to do it on his own? Was he just blowing smoke up all our asses? And is it going to be shenanigans again? And it was just like a heelish thing, because now, I'm going to want to tune in. And if Rollins does do it on his own, like, that's amazing because he cut the promo and then he follows through with it. If he doesn't, I think it's still a great heat magnet because now commentary, at least if they're, adept, which I think they would be in this circumstance, maybe that's me putting a little bit too much confidence in them, they could pounce on Rollins saying, particularly Michael Cole saying, oh, Rollins, he got on the mic, said he was going to do all this on his own and the damn Authority gets involved again tonight. Will Ambrose ever get a fair shot at Seth Rollins or the WWE World Heavyweight Championship? So you have two perfectly acceptable routes.
Right.
And I think the promo kind of set it all in motion. And that's what I think a successful promo is. Now that we're really dissecting it,
Right.
it goes beyond an aesthetic. It has a function to it. And I feel like, that's the function. Because now I already was going to tune into Money in the Bank, obviously, because, it's Twitwell. And I think the card's going to be impressive. But for this match in particular, the question's going to be in the back of my mind. And I'll probably even bring it up while we're reacting. Is Rollins going to do this on his own? So I thought that was a great promo. And yeah, that's where the money is, because now we may see a completely different side of Seth Rollins, and more than that, we may see Dean Ambrose finally become the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. So,
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's another thing too. Is like if you go back to their amazing 30-minute Iron Man match that they had, when you get to overtime, when they and spoiler alert for those of you that haven't seen it, but it's been around for years now, so if you haven't seen it yet, that's your own fault. When they get to the 30-minute mark and it's still tied. If I remember correctly, it was 2-2 at the time. And at the time, the general manager was Maxine, now Katrina on Lucha Underground, which is just a cool connection to make.
right.
She demanded that there must be a winner, and they went into a sudden death where the next pinfall wins. And there was this exchange that they almost perfectly replicated at the Elimination Chamber match that they had where Rollins goes up and does the splash to Ambrose and then goes back to the opposite corner, but Ambrose follows him and does a forearm smash to Rollins in the opposite corner. And then Ambrose comes out of the corner and he goes up against the ropes. And as he's coming back, Rollins meets him in the middle of the ring with a super kick. Ambrose bounces off the ropes and comes back with a rebound lariat, and they're both laid out for a while. That kind of stuff is what drew me into that match. It was, and the crazy thing is, like, he didn't even win with a finisher that he'd normally been using. He won with a finisher that he was using on the indies, but not one that he was like, because it was established in FCW. Rollins' finisher was the Avada Kedavra, which was literally just the super kick to a kneeling opponent, which Alberto Del Rio promptly stole. But then he actually won, if I remember correctly, with the God's Last Gift, which is a package brainbuster where you literally hook the guy's leg like you're going for a fisherman suplex, but then you lift him up and then slam him down neck and shoulders and I guess kayfabe wise head first, but at the same time you lock in a small package, and that's how he won that match.
Ashton, since you're talking about moves, I mean, let's shift the conversation over a little bit. I'm assuming you agreed with everything Heyman had to say here, but I'll still pose the question anyway. What did you think about him invoking the Mark Henry example using a headlock?
Oh, dude, I had goosebumps when he was talking about Mark Henry with the whole headlock thing. That's because the two most important things are, first of all, no one else on the card can do it, because as soon as somebody else does it, it loses its meaning. And second of all, the guys have to sell it, and they have to make it look like death. And yeah, I mean, he's completely right, but the difference is, at this point, obviously no one's going to be using a headlock as a finisher. Could they? I think that if someone would follow his formula to the T, they probably could. But it's one of those things where nowadays it's almost like a video game. It's that video game mentality where, and I even had this mentality when I was a wrestling fan, when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. You identify guys by three things. First of all, it's the catchphrase, which not everybody even has nowadays. Second of all, it's the finisher. And third of all, it's the theme song. Those are the three big things that you identify the pro wrestlers by when you're a kid. And if it's just a headlock, the kid is probably going to think it's a lame finisher. I wasn't even I was still a kid by, worldly standards, but I was a teenager when Umaga was around, and I thought the Samoan Spike was the dumbest finisher ever, and I hated it. And I thought that Umaga was lame for it and everything, but in hindsight, it was great, and it worked well, and Umaga was an amazing heel. But when I was 15, 14 years old, I didn't give a crap about how good of a heel he was. I just hated that finisher, and I wanted him to get something better.
It's funny, this conversation of finishers, and when Heyman was talking about Henry and using the headlock, and after like 30 some weeks or whatever amount of time, like it would be, just crazy over, and the first person to break out of it, it would be such a memorable moment. That's kind of what I was hoping at the time, and I think it was for a time, but it quickly stopped when Dolph Ziggler brought back the sleeper. I thought that was
But
the
you know what the
coolest
difference is,
thing.
though?
What's that?
The fact that Paul Heyman specified that it has to be an intimidating figure.
Right.
And Dolph is anything but.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think, and I do want to say, I thought it was so cool that, Dolph at the time, because everybody was using a sleeper as like a mid-match maneuver, or like that
right.
kind
I mean,
of
it could
slot.
have worked if the commentary would have put him over as basically like a shooter, where like he's such an amazing technician that he knows the exact spot to place his arm so that it knocks the person out with the maximum efficiency. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I feel like they started down a great path, right? Because one of the first victims of it was the great Khali of all people. And
Right.
when you just said that
I thought
Dolph,
that was one of. I thought honestly, I thought that was one of the last victims of it. I thought that was one of
no,
the last people who beat with it.
it was one of the first,
Oh
definitely.
wow.
And the thing was, like, that was so brilliant to me because you just said, right, that Dolph is anything but intimidating. You
Right.
take Khali, and yeah, we can make jokes about Khali all day long, but his look, like, you don't want to cross the guy. So when Dolph is able to neutralize that guy with a sleeper, which again, up until that point was just that mid-match maneuver or that hope spot, like, oh, is he going to get the arm at the third, the third try, whatever, and he's beating guys with it. Holy hell, how does that make Dolph Ziggler look? But I feel like they never really followed through with it as well as they could have, because I think even to this day, maybe it could have been a go-to for Dolph. Like, oh, we've seen him use this before. He's won championships at this, that, and the other. It just never really got to that level, and I think you're right. Commentary definitely played a role in that, which is really a shame, because I was so excited at the time when I thought it was so cool. But yeah, I love their whole conversation about finishers, and I love that they
Well,
use
and
Jake
another
Roberts to a
great
T.
way, another great sort of comparison to make, another great thing to relate back to the Mark Henry sleeper thing, the Master Lock challenge. That thing got built
Yeah.
up so much that even to this day, I remember watching Bobby Lashley break it.
And that's a great point, Ashton. I don't know how I didn't think of the master, because yeah, it was a full Nelson. It was a full Nelson applied by a very muscular looking, very built young man in Chris
Yep.
Masters. And I love that. Like now that I'm older and I can appreciate things like that more, I realize just how genius it was.
Well, and
And
what's also great is that not only did they use it as a way to put him over as this legit, like, if he gets this move locked in, you're not getting out of it, but then anytime anybody ever came close, he could use it to get heat too, because he would, blow and then lock it back in and make him pass out and toss him around, or like he would get a smaller guy. Like I feel like I remember, I don't remember who it was, Jamie Noble. They had like a really small guy in there, and he was just it might have even been Rey Mysterio. He was just throwing him around with the Master Lock locked in, and it just looked so painful.
could have been Steven Richards. I know they had a little mini feud.
Yeah, but it
Maybe.
was a smaller guy though. Steven Richards is like 6 feet at least.
Not sure. Maybe it was Ray. But yeah, and that I actually was a Chris Masters fan growing up during his first run. It's a shame that he, even said like he had his problems at the time, this and that, because I really thought he was going to be
Yeah,
a world champion.
yeah. From what
Not
I
as
understand,
far.
he was kind of in that same grouping as Carlito, where they kind of had all the natural talent in the world, and they just didn't want to work at improving. Like they were both going through, I don't know if you want to call it a phase, but they were both really lazy at the time. At a point, I want to say late 2009, maybe 2010, Chris Masters started working his ass off to get better. Something clicked for him, and he still ended up getting released in 2011. But still, like the point that we're trying to make doesn't have to do with him specifically. It's the way that they
Right.
built up the Master Lock and
Oh yeah.
the way that they protected it, and the way that really anything. I mean, if a thumb to the neck can be a finishing maneuver, anything can be a good dude. Mojo Rawley and Naomi are perfect examples. You go ass to mouth and suddenly it puts someone out for 3. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all in the presentation, and Heyman even says that the three elements are that the move's got to be presented, sold, and protected. Let me ask you something, Ash, in terms of protection, because this is something I was thinking about asking you when we were going to do our analysis of this. Let's go to I think one of the hottest guys right now. We haven't stopped talking about him. His name hasn't stopped coming out of our mouths. Kevin Owens. Do you feel like they did a good job of protecting the pop-up powerbomb at Chamber by having Cena only take two? I mean, I know
Yes.
Zayn
Well,
like
yeah. I
both
mean,
those.
here's my thing. They protect that move not just by having him win with it in a match. They protect that move by when he hits it on someone outside of the context of a match, they're down for the count.
Right.
When he hit it on Cena both times, that's why I was so surprised when Cena kicked out of it in the match when he got hit by it the first time, because when Owens hit him with it outside of the context of a match, he was laying there motionless for minutes, not even seconds, for minutes. Like it seemed like he was never going to get up the first time. The second time, I think they cut to commercial quickly enough that I couldn't really kind of let it soak in that he was down for so long. But that's how you protect a move, though, because sure, Cena kicked out of the first one, but there's always that kayfabe explanation of, oh my God, he's just going on instincts right now. And the fact that he couldn't kick out of the second one is huge. That's how many F5s has Cena kicked out of?
Right, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because I was getting ready to ask you a follow-up question. Where do you stand on the whole debate? Because I've heard, I think both people in the business and other commentators on the internet, like us, say the same thing. That it kind of rubs them the wrong way that you call it a finisher, and yet in most cases it's not really like a one and done sort of deal. Like you hit one and the match is over. Like most guys can take maybe two or maybe even three of those. Like where do you stand on that whole debate? Do you feel like that not enough is done to being really protect the credibility and the allure of the finisher, or do you feel like with the Kevin Owens, the Brock Lesnar's, and characters like that, we're doing a solid enough job of just making them seem intimidating and stuff
I
like that?
think I think that if somebody wants to take the word finisher in its literal sense, they're probably not someone that should be a wrestling fan.
Okay.
Because if you're willing to translate something that literally, you're thinking way too much, and you're not going to allow yourself to get invested in anything that happens or suspend your disbelief.
See, and I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you because it's funny. I think it's not even so much that it's got to be one and done. Like I think it's all about the placement of the finisher like in the match. Like I know, for example, what's one good example I can use? Oh, my favorite matchup of all time, right? Angle Benoit Royal Rumble 2003. I know there was one spot in the match. Benoit gets hung up top turnbuckle. His face hits the turnbuckle. Angle hits the angle slam. I thought it was over because they placed it like they were going for several minutes at that point. I thought, oh, he hit it. It's done. And then Benoit kicks out, and I pop. I think that might have even been the second angle slam, actually. And I thought he was done. He still kicked out. So I don't even think it's a matter of, oh, we got to protect the finisher. I think you can create an atmosphere of believability when you have two guys like killing each other, or just one guy that's so dominant he's ragdolling another guy, and you hit that finisher, whether they kick out or not. I still think you kind of achieve your objective, and that's just creating that moment within the match.
I like the idea of having sort of your signature offense where, like with Cena, it's, two shoulder blocks, proto bomb, five knuckle shuffle. But then also having more than one finisher that you can use, that you can kind of go to, but having that go-to. Cena's go-to finisher is the attitude adjustment. Kevin Owens, it would be the pop-up power bomb. But I also like the idea of having that, like, okay, I threw everything but the kitchen sink at you. Here's the kitchen sink kind of finisher.
Right,
Like
right.
with Rollins, like I go back to that 30-minute Iron Man match, the God's Last Gift, Brainbuster, where he did the Brainbuster and immediately had the small package locked in. Another good example, a long time ago, obviously not necessarily the case now, the Tombstone used to be like that, where Kane and Undertaker would beat guys with a choke slam consistently, but if a choke slam didn't get the job done, that was when it was time to whip out the Tombstone. That's the kind of
Right.
thing. Yeah, like, and then even now, you look at Undertaker, when he can't even get the job done with the Tombstone, he still has the last ride power bomb and the go-go plata or Hell's Gate submission hold. Like, I like it when guys don't just have one option to use as a finisher. That's why I wish Ziggler would get something new, man. As good as the zigzag is, he's got to have something to use if that doesn't work, and it doesn't work far more often than I'd like to admit.
And I'm so glad you mentioned Undertaker because I loved Undertaker for that
Yeah,
same reason. Just his
yeah.
ability to adapt his game in terms of finishers and have all these go-tos. Like it's almost like a checklist. Like a guy's legit if he could survive the choke slam, the tombstone, the last ride, and maybe even withstand a Hell's Gate and get to the ropes. Yeah, and I just love that Taker had all those weapons. And even then, like if somebody would survive all those weapons, Taker having built that kind of a rap sheet of finishers, you never know if he's like going to come up with something on the spot.
Well, and
Uh,
another thing too, and I know that it's not really a different finisher, but Cena going to the middle rope for the AA,
yeah,
the
definitely.
super AA, because I don't think anyone's ever kicked out of that.
I don't think anyone's ever kicked out of that either.
So that's
So
another one too. And Orton with his punt, like if he can't get the job done with like 2 or 3 RKO's, he backs up into the corner and he knows what he has to do, and he has to go for the punt. Now, I can't even remember the last time he actually hit a punt. I feel like it might have been early 2014, maybe late 2013 during his run with the Authority when they first started. I don't remember.
right.
But that kind of stuff, I'm an absolute sucker for, and I have been since I was a kid. I think that's kind of a symptom of becoming a wrestling fan when you are a kid. Is you immediately start becoming more attached to the finishers, and I think that our generation specifically does kind of look at it as a video game where you have to, like with Dolph Ziggler matches, he has to hit that show off DDT before he can hit the Famouser, and he has to hit that Famouser before he can hit the zigzag, and at some point during that whole series, he's got to sprinkle in a super kick or two just for good measure. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, when Chris Jericho came back in 2007 and his first match back against Santino Marella, I was pleasantly surprised when the finish was the debut of the Codebreaker because I thought he was going to end that match with the Lion Salt. So to see Jericho come back and kind of up his game and have that new finish, I thought was
and
so
the
cool
great
because
thing is
now.
he still uses the Lion Salt, just not as often.
Exactly, like he has the Walls of Jericho now. The modifier of the Walls of Jericho being the Lion Tamer with the knee in the back of the head. The
Which is kind
Lions.
of like his, okay, this match needs to end, go to end the match kind of thing.
Exactly. So Jericho's another one kind of in that Taker class. Big Show used to be like that because I remember, choke slam, Cobra Clutch backbreaker, Colossal Clutch, and then of course the KO punch. But now it's just really the KO punch, which is kind of a
Because
shame.
he doesn't need anything else. It's so well protected.
And that's true. That is true. I think that's the exception because it is such a well protected move. So you can forgive it. Yeah, man. I really loved Heyman and Austin's conversation, about the DDT, because I know Austin, he even admits himself, like, he's got those old school elements about him, and he sees just everybody like, DDTs. It's funny that he said he didn't really see the show or know about any DDTs, because that was the same episode that Ziggler planted Kingston with that DDT that we kind of talked about on TwitWow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I get what he's saying. It kind of makes me, almost smile a little bit, because I wonder, when our generation of wrestling fans are long gone and wrestling, years and years into the future, if, and you already, I guess, kind of see it in other areas, like Japan and stuff, but if the tombstone would be just like a
Well, yeah, that's the I don't think that there is such thing as a sacred move right now, because I mean, sort of the least recent but still going on desensitization would be the super kick. Everyone is using super kicks now. And
right.
I mean, everyone's using DDTs, but super kicks are a little bit more recent than that, because Shawn Michaels has been using super kicks to put people away as recently as, I would say, maybe like 2009 even.
Yeah, and that's why when you and I were having the conversation about Mundo on Lucha Underground with his heel turn, changing up his in-ring style and what his alternative finisher could be, one of the first things I said was, well, I know it can't be a super kick, because everybody's doing that, and I want him
Right.
to stand out.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I do like, though. If you think about it, I like that they let Alberto Del Rio, when he was in WWE, beat Dolph Ziggler with a different version of the super kick, because it was the kneeled super kick. And again, I mean, if you want to go to FCW, that was Rollins. He was using that opponent on their knee super kick to win matches when he was both FCW 15 champion and FCW heavyweight champion. So yeah, it's a great modification.
And I think you could get away with it, because in the case of Alberto Del Rio, right, it worked so brilliantly within the story, because they had the
Yeah,
whole
because of
Dolph had the
the whole,
concussion thing.
yeah, exactly, the
I,
concussion storyline. But then
I,
again, you also have to look at different moves that are being completely neutered as far as their effectiveness. I mean, if you want to talk about an example of a move that used to be hit it once and the match is over, rare exception, somebody kicks out of one, and then if you hit it a second time, it's over. The frog splash. And now you've got Tanahashi hitting 4, 5, up to like 10 in matches that he needs to win. And we aren't blinking at it, because it makes sense. Like, you want to make sure that the other guy is put away. So he hits it once on the guy while they're laying on their back, just to flip them over, so you can hit it once again while they're actually laying on their back. I think I said that before, when they're laying on their stomachs first. But yeah, the idea isn't necessarily, oh, this is a finisher, therefore you hit it once and the match is over. This is a finisher, meaning this is the most devastating move in your arsenal, but you can't use it until your opponent is worn down enough to actually put them in it.
and see, like, that's what I'm talking about how times already, our generation have changed. Because, like, you go back even 10 years ago, when I was still a kid, I was only like 12, even a little bit further than that. When I would see the frog splash, and primarily it was RVDs, because I know Eddie Guerrero was kind of going through stuff at the time, and I wouldn't see his frog splash regularly until like a few years later. But when Van Dam would hit the 5-star frog splash, that was it. It was over, and I loved
Well,
how
and
they.
that's another thing too. The reason they called it, from what I understood, I guess the actual original reason was they called it the 5-star frog splash. It was a Joey Styles thing, because RVD was getting all kinds of 5-star match ratings. But I think the kayfabe explanation the WWE gave was because he could rotate his body in midair. That's what made it the 5 stars.
Right, right, right.
Now you've got Wesley Blake doing the exact same thing on NXT, and nobody's even mentioning the fact that he rotates his body in midair.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's just because that's the thing they want to keep exclusively to Rob, even though they don't have a working relationship right now. I don't know. But again, it just goes back to that point. Like, I even remember, hell, back at the very first Elimination Chamber, like, RVD's frog splash was so devastating. He legitimately crushed Triple H's trachea. I mean, that was a very serious thing. But, like, he would hit it, done. And I mean, say what you will about Rob. I know you and I have our criticisms of him at times, but I loved how much they protected his frog splash. I don't think in my time growing up I ever saw anybody kick out of it, because either he hit it and it was over, or he didn't hit it at all. One or the other. Never like that in between.
Right.
Um,
And you
and
know what, though? Here's my thing. As much as we want to talk about, oh, all these moves are getting degraded, and they don't mean as much anymore, there are some moves that I think that it's funny, because they talk about, oh, well, the DDT doesn't mean anything anymore. Well, that's just because the WWE doesn't care if it means anything anymore, because it's not anyone's finisher. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Nobody's using a regular DDT as their finisher. I mean, you've got Ambrose using the double arm underhook swinging sort of DDT, which that makes it different. That sets it apart. That makes it more effective. It makes sense that it would be a finisher. But then you think about other moves that are super simple that the WWE has gone out of their way to protect, and they are effective as finishers. This is kind of the other side of the same coin. The spear. Roman Reigns' spear is one of the most devastating finishers. He only needed to hit one to defeat Bray freaking Wyatt last night. The spear is one of those moves that has been protected for 20 years now.
Yeah, I mean, he only needed one spear to beat Daniel Bryan, and he kicked out of Bryan's knee plus, which up until that point, the knee plus was another one that, like, holy hell, he hits it, you're done.
Yep.
And that's the thing. I think it goes back to I'm not. You didn't say that I was, but I'm just putting it out there. Like, I'm not salty that like a lot of moves seem to have been downgraded, like these two seem to be, because again, times change. Again,
Well, and
Paul
that's another
Heyman
thing too.
said,
Speaking of times changing, one thing that Jim Ross complains about a lot, and that I totally understand his perspective, closed fists, right?
right.
This is a big issue with Jim Ross. He thinks that that closed fists should be banned. And it's not necessarily you're not allowed to do closed fists. It's we're going to tell the audience that closed fists aren't allowed so that when closed fists do get thrown, it means more. That's what I like about the idea.
Yeah.
But then you look at the Big Show, and his finisher is a punch. That's it. I mean, you want to talk about taking a normal, just every day, gets used in every match kind of move and turning it into something truly devastating. The Big Show's knockout punch is the perfect example of that, because nobody kicks out of that. Brock Lesnar got hit with that and was staggered, and I think he might have fallen down, but the only reason he didn't get pinned by it is because the match hadn't technically started yet, from what I remember.
Exactly, and I can understand where Jim is coming from, and I think that's why you and I admired Goldust's in ring work. One of many reasons, because he would do the open strikes,
Right.
and
Kane does that
that's
too. He's really
Kane,
good.
Kane does that too. But I feel like Big Show is the exception rather than the rule, because look at him. Like you see that's not a
Well,
normal.
no, I'm just
Like
trying to make the point though that if the WWE wants to sort of bring back a
yeah.
devastating finish, they can do it. Like if they wanted to bring back a DDT, it would take a lot more work than the knockout punch did, but they could totally do it. The
Oh,
problem is
absolutely.
they just aren't interested in doing it right now because a lot of their top guys, specifically Randy Orton with the rope hung variation, are using the DDT.
Right, and again, like to Paul Heyman's point, Harley Race. I mean, his finisher was a vertical suplex. Can you imagine? I mean, you're not going to put butts in seats in 2015 with somebody. I mean, unless you really went out of your way, however, to make
Cesaro.
vertical. Yeah, Cesaro's apronplex. Yeah, that. I mean, if you
No, no,
started
no,
doing,
no. I mean, literally, Cesaro could you you could make a vertical suplex convincing if it was Cesaro delivering it,
you really think so?
or Ryback. Ryback did it to who did he do it to? It might have been to Ziggler at the Elimination Chamber, where he just held him up for so long.
See, and that might be the only way that I could even buy, because you figure all that blood rushing to that
Right.
kayfabe wise, like you wouldn't even know where the hell you are to kick
Yeah.
out.
Well, and
Um,
that's the crazy thing too, is that like people say nowadays, like, oh, the vertical suplex is dead, but at the end of the day, there really isn't that much of a difference between a vertical suplex and a brainbuster. Like,
no.
there is a very fine line drawn between those two moves, and really it all comes down to sort of whether you sink your hips downward or forward. Like it's such a ridiculous fine line to draw, and brainbusters are finishers. But vertical suplexes can't be? I don't think so.
I think again it goes back to the 3 points.
I mean,
That Heyman
dude,
was.
Generico used to use the brainbuster on the top turnbuckle that was his that was his tombstone. That was his last resort. If he couldn't beat you with anything else, that's what he resorted to.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my biggest criticisms of like the indie scene, particularly Ring of Honor, when we watch some shows, sometimes I think the near falls get a little ridiculous, and they kick out of moves, and I'm like, come on,
Right, but the
did you
thing
really
there
kick out of
though
that?
is that's just because they're doing all this innovative stuff that
Right,
looks like it could be a finisher.
right.
If all of the offense that they were doing was just punches and kicks and suplexes and, stuff that we've seen before, I don't think we would complain nearly as much, because it's like, okay, well, he hit him with a whole bunch of stuff, but none of the stuff was really all that horrifyingly painful looking.
Oh, another finisher I just thought about when we're talking about this. I mean, Sheamus's bro kick. I think. I mean,
Yes, yeah, just a regular freaking bicycle, like this, throwing it back to Cobra Kai and the freaking Karate Kid, man.
yeah, exactly. Like really, when you just strip all of it down, the guy doing all this stuff, it is just a by the numbers bicycle kick, and he's won world championships with that move.
And it's
So
devastating. Even to this day, it is devastating.
oh yeah,
The
oh
way that
absolutely.
they sold it when Randy Orton got hit with it on Monday, good lord.
And Austin was talking about they're working hard but need to work smart, and I think that's really the whole crux of why you and I are having this conversation to begin with. Because Austin's criticism when he invoked the DDT was that he concedes that these guys are better athletes than he was and previous generations, but they seem to be working hard and not working smart. I don't know. After this conversation,
Now, you know what? I
I'd frankly
understand why
disagree.
he's saying that, though. I do. I understand why he's saying that. He's saying that for the reason that I just explained to you about the ROH stuff, because we see, a double underhook, neck breaker, jaw breaker, shoulder breaker. I like all these ridiculous moves. Like you see a 10-second Roderick Strong sequence, and you think, oh my God, that guy's dead. There's no way he's ever going to live again. He's probably not even breathing. And then he kicks out. It takes us out of the moment. Well, maybe for Austin, because he's been in the business for a lot longer, he sees Randy Orton hitting a rope hung DDT, and he says, "Oh my God, that's got to be it. That guy's dead," because he's so used to Jake the Snake Roberts killing people with it. And then the guy kicks out at two, and he's like, "Oh, this is bullshit. This takes me out of it." That kind of thing. So I think it's more of a generational thing, because
Yeah,
he and Heyman both come from an era where your finishers were, like you said, the vertical suplex, the Cobra Clutch going with Sergeant Slaughter, that kind of stuff. And I mean, just recently, Chief Jay Strongbow passed away. He used to use a sleeper as his finisher,
right.
and I mean Rocky Johnson and it was actually Rocky Johnson who is no, he used to win matches with a drop kick. So you see stuff like that happening, and now in a single sequence, you'll see boom, 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 vertical suplex, drop kick, like all these moves that were at one point finishers, and then the guy kicks out of it. It's like, good God, how is this guy even still alive? I can't even believe this is happening right now. That's how we feel watching some ROH and PWG shows, where you'll see a guy. I think Roddy Strong is the number one guy because he has the most ridiculous flurries of offense I've ever seen in my entire life. Where he'll kick you and then get you up in a fireman's carry and drop you on his knees, and then he'll pick you up and he'll pick you up in a vertical suplex position, but then drop you back first on his knees again, and then he'll get the pin. But then there are other sequences where he'll do stuff that looks just as devastating, or like Red Dragon, where they do the punch, punch, knee to the face, punch, slaps, chop, knee to the face, kick, back to the head, and then they go for the pin, and it's a 2 count. And you're wondering, how is that guy even still breathing, much less kicking out?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. I definitely get where Austin is coming from. I really have nothing else to say about finishers unless you do. If there were any other
No, I
points you
mean,
want
well,
to make.
that's really all that there was to talk about. There were the three main points. It was the big Lesnar tease at the end, Lesnar Austin tease, the state of promos and the state of selling and finishers, and that's about it. I mean, the only other thing that's notable is Paul Heyman's birthday is September 11th. Of course, it is.
Yeah. Oh man.
He turns 50 though, man. That's crazy to even think about him being that old.
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I really love, but it's not even worthy of discussion again. I loved what he said about Brock Lesnar, and I loved how he defended himself against the people that are like, "Oh, Brock needs to work more dates," which I always thought was just a lot of crap. But he said,
You know
uh,
why people say that though?
because they love him so much and they want to see him
Yeah,
more.
yeah. People
Yeah.
aren't saying that out of hate. People aren't saying that because they dislike Brock Lesnar or because they think he sucks and he hasn't earned a spot.
Oh no, no, of course not.
People are saying that because they friggin' love Brock Lesnar and want to see more of him.
Yeah, I mean, I know you and I have definitely been there, but
Yeah,
I loved what Heyman said, where it's like, their children need a father more than WWE needs Brock Lesnar,
yeah.
and like that really resonated with me, and I
Right.
have a lot of respect for Brock. I mean,
And that's another thing that he said too, was being a dad has chilled him out.
and I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Look, I know, and hell, you're talking to a guy that, I mean, Chris Benoit is my favorite of all time. We love hearing the stories of like, oh, I'm passionate about this. This is all I want to do. But when you see somebody actually bringing reality and sense into it, for whatever reason, that's a turnoff. When Brock says, yeah, it's good money for me, and it allows me to provide the kind of life that I want. And, Paul Heyman said multiple times, this guy's a farmer. I know that turns a lot of people off. For me, I'm like, you know what, Brock, good for you. Because I think
Yeah.
anybody that does a certain thing and they put the time into it, I can't wait to see him again. I do think, again, Rollins, Lesnar, SummerSlam, I do think that's kind of
He's
the big.
either going to show up at Money in the Bank or on the show after Money in the Bank.
Yeah, because I mean, SummerSlam isn't that far away, but I would say the show after Money in the Bank because
He's
I
actually advertised to show up at Battleground, which is the following
is
week.
he.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay,
Yep.
so it may be earlier than I anticipated, but regardless, I'm happy for Brock. I'm happy for the deal that he came to. I'm elated that he stayed with us. I really thought we were gonna lose him to UFC, and when they were talking about that, I'm like,
Well, that's
he
another
could
crazy
enjoy it.
thing too. Is that's like the most babyface thing Brock Lesnar's ever done
Yeah, I mean to go out publicly, before WrestleMania, not leaving any of
on
us in the dark
ESPN.
on ESPN. And if he's saying I'm loving, and then to hear him say, well, Paul say on behalf of Brock that they're loving what they're doing and this and that, that's what made me happy because I
Yeah.
could be selfish and be like, oh, I love Brock Lesnar. Why isn't he doing more? He should be working with this guy, this guy, this guy. No, he's a father. He's making good money. He's
Yeah.
living the life he wants to live. That's all any of
Well,
us want to do.
I mean, say what you
You know?
will there, but I'm still waiting for that Lesnar Orton match.
You and me both, man. I'm like, come on, motherfucker, get the program started. But in all seriousness, that's all any of us really want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm just happy for Brock that he's actually doing it. So good on him, good on Paul. I love this interview. The tease at the end was pretty cool, but again, neither one of us are putting much stock into it. I'm just glad we got to talk about this because that was a much better discussion than I initially anticipated, actually, about promos
Yeah,
and
we actually ended up
stuff.
going over 50 minutes.
That's awesome.
So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed our discussion here. Leave any comments and thoughts that you have regarding what we've said so far below. What do you guys think about the current state of promos and finishers? What do you think about the whole idea of the potential of Lesnar versus Austin in a Texas death match at WrestleMania 32? I personally think there's very, very, very slim chance of it happening, but I'm curious as to what you guys think. And yeah, tell us what you think, and we will see you guys for Lucha Underground Twit Wow tomorrow night.